Hello and welcome to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. I'm Ksenia Svetlova. You are listening to the ROPESCAST from the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. We are building a post-conflict Middle East by connecting the next generations of Israeli, Palestinian and regional young leaders. We believe in an integrated post-conflict region where the dividends of peace far outweigh the costs of war. Visit ropes.org to join the vision. Our guest today is John Limbert, who is an academic, novelist, and retired Foreign Service officer. In 2018, he ended 12 years as class of 1955 professor of Middle Eastern Studies at the US Naval Academy. During a 34-year diplomatic career, he served mostly in the Middle East and Islamic Africa, including 2 tours in Iraq, was ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, and served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State responsible for Iranian affairs. Beginning in 1964, he worked in Iran as a university and high school teacher, and later was among the last American diplomats to serve in Tehran, where he was held hostage in 1979-1981. He has authored numerous books and articles on Middle Eastern subjects, including the espionage novel co-authored with Ambassador Mark Grossman, Believers set in Washington and Tehran in the 1980s and the present. Hello, Ambassador Limbert, and welcome to the ROPESCAST. So great to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Amazing. Ambassador, when you're looking today at what is happening in Iran, where US and Israel are striking jointly the targets of the Islamic Republic, well, do you think that it was avoidable? Looking back, and for you knowing Iran so well, could there be a different path? Was it inevitable that we end clench of war?
That's a good question. Let me just say, first of all, just speak personally, because these are not just academic or political questions for me. They're very personal. They're very personal, and I just want to say how upset and heartsick I am to see what's going on, because so many of us, Americans, Israelis, Iranians, Europeans, many people have worked for decades to prevent just what is happening. The other part of this, which is again personal for me, is I have many friends and family members in the region, in Iran, in Israel, in the Gulf, in the Gulf states. I also, as you mentioned, I taught for 12 years at the US Naval Academy, and many of my former students are now Navy or Marine, U.S. Navy or U.S. Marine officers deployed in the Gulf. I worry about them. I worry about everybody out there. They deserve better than that. They don't deserve to be the pawns of short-sighted politicians who think only of their own power. But was this avoidable? Good question. It sometimes reminds me, Ksenia, of a Greek tragedy, really, where the characters struggle to avoid their fate, but whatever they do, destiny catches up with them. And if you think about it, 47 years, Iran, Israel, the United States have been exchanging threats, have been exchanging insults, been exchanging accusations, and whatever, as much as people of goodwill and good intentions tried, worked for this, they couldn't change that situation. And you could say that was a disaster waiting to happen, waiting for the wrong circumstances and the wrong combination of people. So in that sense, maybe it was unavoidable. unless, I mean, can you change maybe it was destined to happen. And, you struggle in a Greek tragedy, you struggle to change your destiny, but you can't do it. There were times when it looked like maybe this can change, maybe there can be a different way, but for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And as a result, we are where we are today, which is frankly in a very bad place.
Why is that? Why we are in such a bad place? Because, in Israel, about 90% of the Israelis support the war, and many people are sure that, we have to do what we have to do. And I checked the surveys in the United States. It seemed that more Americans that, anybody imagined also support this war, and they are not only Republicans. So what do you think? Why do you think that we are in a bad place?
I have heard of this about Israel, and in the United States, I don't know what your source is. Mine, from everything I read, it's the contrary. It's the contrary. The support there's support of the war from people who will support whatever Trump does. Doesn't matter. He's a cult leader, and that's the nature of a cult. The nature of a cult is you support the leader. He says he tells you to drink poison, you drink poison. He tells you to burn yourself, you burn yourself. You burn yourself. Doesn't that make sense? It doesn't have to be true, but you do it. And that's maybe, 25, 30% that support will support whatever he does. But for the rest, no. I think there's a lot of opposition and a lot of unease. Israel's a different case. Frankly, in many ways, the Iranians, I think, the Islamic Republic brought this on themselves by 47 years talking about the destruction of Israel. Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about destroying somebody, particularly with the history that exists. They're going to take it seriously. And eventually it catches up with you. And they kept repeating. I mean, they talked about, Magbat America, death to America, Magbat Israel, death to Israel, death to Israel. And they kept doing this for 47 years, long after these slogans had gone stale. I mean, they were past their sell-by date. If you tried to sell them in the supermarket, you get in trouble with the law. They were meaningless, but to people listening to them, they were not they were not meaningless. So when somebody for 47 years repeats, "We're going to wipe you off the map. We're going to eliminate you," something's going to happen. That's part of this inevitability that I'm talking about. And the ironic thing is that the way a friend of mine put it, he said that your prime minister and the leader of Iran were what we call intimate enemies. They fed off each other. Because I gather from what I read that before October 7th, before the attack of Hamas, Netanyahu was not very popular. His popularity his approval rating was down. But someone once said that Khamenei and the leaders of the Islamic Republic and President Ahmadinejad in particular gave him gifts with their rhetoric, and the rhetoric for Iran was self-destructive, because eventually it was going to lead to this. And they knew it was against their own interests. And there were voices in Iran that said, we shouldn't be talking like this anymore. We shouldn't use these slogans. These slogans are dead for us. Why do we keep going after Israel? What's our problem with Israel? Why do we care about the Arabs? We're not Arabs. Why should we care about them? Why should we spend our money on an Arab cause? But no one, people didn't listen, and so the result is what we have today. I mean, you threaten people, you keep threatening people year after year after year. You shouldn't be surprised when those same people react violently.
Well, you are, one of the few Americans that actually witnessed how Iran changed just in front of your eyes, because you were there. You served in the American embassy in Tehran during the Islamic Revolution. So, I wonder, this indoctrination of death to Israel, death to the United States, um, when the people are not ready for this kind of slogans, when they don't live and breathe, this atmosphere, you cannot really influence them, not in, a day or two or even a year. But something was probably like prone to this kind of culture, So I would like for you to maybe reflect and, tell us a little bit about your memories from that time. What happened in Iranian society? How, this cult of, hatred just took over this fantastic and beautiful country.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. Then, and historians, I'm a historian by training, and this is the kind of thing that historians love, because they can't predict. I mean, no, but they can look at a situation and they'll tell you, well, how did it happen? They'll look at how did it happen? Because frankly, nobody predicted it. I didn't predict it, but I don't think anybody did. Not American, not Israelis, not Iranian, that Iran would be ruled by theocrats, by people who in the seventh century got into a time machine and landed in the 20th century in Iran, and landed with the same ideas that they had in the seventh century, and then took over a country. I mean, and this has no precedent in Iranian history. I mean, religion's always been important there, but people, clerics, religious figures never ruled directly. But now for 47 years, you have clerics as ministers, as representatives in parliament, as officers, as supreme leaders. I mean, who would have thought? But Khomeini's, genius, and you have to give him credit. We say in English, you give the devil his due, and you have to give the devil his due. He did something remarkable. He put together a coalition to bring down the Shah. I mean, if it had just been him and his religious associates, revolution would never have won. They would never have won. But he put together a coalition. His own religious radicals, religious traditionalists who really never liked politics. They said we shouldn't mix our religion with politics. Leftists of all kinds, Orthodox, Stalinists, Maoists, all sorts of people, nationalists, secular liberals, all these people marched under his banner. And what most of them had never done was to read his writings or listen to his speeches, because he laid it out very clear. He says that he was not interested in democracy. He was not interested in pluralism, freedom of the press, or any of those things. And when he got into power, when the revolution succeeded, he and his associates had a powerful, cohesive, well-organized network that took power. And as the saying goes, sometimes power lies in the gutter, and you're just someone's just waiting for someone to pick it up.
Do you remember Ambassador, what you felt when you first learned about him? I mean, he was a prominent figure. He was in exile, living in Paris. As a historian, as somebody that knows Iran and Iranian culture well, what did you think about this guy that wanted to lead Iran to go back and so on? Did it frighten you? Did you understand at the time who he was?
Like many Americans and like many Iranians, didn't know. When it wasn't familiar. Now, to many of my Iranian friends, they liked him because he could bring down the Shah.
Okay.
He could do what others couldn't do. He was scrupulously honest. He wasn't out to enrich himself. He was not in the pay of any foreigners. All these things were important. And he spoke a language that most people could understand. And so he had an appeal. And of course, but a friend of mine once said, he said, Iranian friend, he said, I've never heard of this guy. I've never heard of Khomeini. And as the disturbances kicked up through 1978, he said, let me find out what he's about. So he took Khomeini's books, went to his villa that he owned up by the Caspian Sea, spent a weekend there just by himself reading, drove back to Tehran, came to his house, and said to his wife, pack up, we're leaving.
Oh my God. So it was that clear to him.
And people of my father-in-law's generation, because my wife is Iranian, family is Iranian, and they knew, because they had suffered under the influence of powerful clerics before the Pahlavi dynasty came into power and secularized a lot of the society. And they remembered, and they said the place was awful. I mean, the literacy rate was 5%. The life expectancy was 30 years. You couldn't travel from city to city without being robbed or murdered. I mean, it was just awful. Foreigners owned everything. It was just awful. And, mercifully, my father-in-law did not live to see what happened. But he remembered, because he remembered from those times. And people of that generation, I think, knew. They tried to warn the younger people. Mm-hmm. But of course, younger people never listen to the advice of their elders.
I wanted to ask you about that because, very often we see in the media, especially in the social media, we see these photos of beautiful Iranian girls in the 70s, before the Islamic Revolution, wearing bikinis or miniskirts. And then, there is this kind of illusion that maybe all of Iran looked like that at the time. But how did Iran really look like? I mean, definitely there were some also conservative stratas and people.
It's two societies. I mean, there was the sort of North Tehran and South Tehran, and they lived in different worlds. You went into small towns like the place behind me. You would not see any unveiled women in public. You just would not see that. You would not see them. Now, maybe in the privacy of their homes, something might be something else, but in public, no. Mm-hmm. So there was an Iran that was very traditional, very conservative, and then there was an Iran of the kind that you describe, the North Tehran, the fashionable restaurants, the nightclubs. The problem was that the two couldn't. I don't know. There was the one. It was the one. Those on top basically ridiculed, despised, and lorded it over the other, so that traditional people their ideas, their beliefs, their customs were ridiculed in films and in books and in the popular press. If you were a veiled women, for example, were not allowed in certain public places or hotels. That was
like in Turkey not so long ago.
Like in Turkey. I mean, but that then when things change, you go to the opposite extreme. And those people who are at the bottom are now on top. They now have, before they were ridiculed and despised. Now they have position, they have respect, they have power, and boy, they're gonna get revenge on the people who ridiculed and despised them for so many years. So they're now the people who man the morals police, the besiege, the guards, the checkpoints, because boy, they have position, they have respect, and they can bully their compatriots. They can boss them around, and so the idea that you're going to get rid of that this regime is going to fall if you kill 10 leaders. 100 leaders is just not right, because they're, maybe 85% of those other people despise the system, but that leaves 15% who have a stake in it. 15% of 90 million people. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a lot of
12 million people, and they'll fight. Because
those are the people with rifles.
They're the people with the guns.
Yes,
they're the people with the guns. And they're the people with basically the license. They're told, go out, and anybody who raises a fuss, you shoot them, because they're an enemy. They're your enemy, and they know that if this regime falls, they're going to be on a lot of lists, and there's not going to be a lot of reconciliation. But there will be a lot of retribution.
Well, this is a very, I think it's a very honest account of what is really happening there. And I think that a lot of people in the Middle East, specifically in Israel, need to hear that, because there was some kind of euphoria during the last few days. Well, Khamenei is no longer with us. Now everything will change. And again, I'm not an expert on Iran. My study of my focus of my studies was Egypt, actually. But from the little I know that there are institutions, and they've built very resilient institutions that are ingrained in the Iranian soil. Ambassador, before we go and discuss, the possibilities of, dealing with the situation and getting rid of this somehow of this regime, I would like first to walk with you in the memory lane and to discuss the hostage crisis of 1979. This dramatic moment that, you were hostage for how many days?
We were there 444. So 14 months. About
14 months. 14 long months. So now, we have over 150 Israelis that can relate to your experience, because they were hostages of Hamas. But that was unprecedented.
And much worse conditions.
Much worse conditions. Also, they were tortured and sexually harassed. But at that time, I think it was unprecedented. And as an American diplomat representing the largest power in the world, to have something like this, you guys were not ready for something like this to happen, weren't you?
Something bad was going to happen. When the embassy was taken on the 4th of November, 1979, in October, around October 20th, so maybe 2 weeks before, we learned that President Carter had agreed to let the Shah into the United States for medical treatment. And at that point, in Tehran, we knew we were finished. We knew something bad was going to happen. We didn't know what.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know what, but we knew it was going to be bad. Because the situation, the situation was very unstable at that time. There were so many groups competing for power. There was a political free-for-all going on. There were very strong anti-American currents going on. Although I never personally felt in much danger. I mean, I went everywhere, traveled around in those few months I was there. I traveled around the country. I talked to people. They didn't like our politics, but it's one of those, things of people when you talk to people, and if you can talk to them, they'll talk to you. And sort of ingrained hospitality, ingrained politeness. They will talk to you politely. But so when this happened, the first thought most of us was, when they first took the embassy, we thought, well, this is like a student sit-in from the 70s. Those of us who remember those. You took over a university office or government office and you made a declaration and you marched out. We thought it was sort of like that. And actually, some of the people who took us said that was their intention. That was their intention. But obviously, once Khomeini, to everybody's surprise, I don't think any people expected this, endorsed this. I mean, as the head of a country, for a head of a country to endorse, that's what's unprecedented. Attacking an embassy is easy. I mean, there's no particular art in that. But for the head of a country to endorse occupying a foreign embassy and holding diplomats against their will, that was unprecedented. And once that happened, we weren't going anywhere.
You probably had some conversations with people who, were in charge of your activity. What was your sense? What did they want? This revolutionary Islamists, what were they dreaming of? What kind of country did they want to build? And is the Iran of today, is this the country that they wanted to establish?
It's a really good question. That's a really good question. One of them told me, in a sort of moment of frankness, he said, "Look, this is not about you. This is not about the embassy. This is not about the embassy. This is not about America. It's not about the Shah. We are settling scores among ourselves.
Oh,
this is our chance to drive out of power, to crush our opponents, particularly the nationalists and the liberals, because after the fall of the Shah, in early '79, a lot of sort of nationalist, secular, liberal figures had nominal powers. They had offices. They were ministers. They were in what was called the interim government, the provisional government. The prime minister, for example, the prime minister and others. And they were not religious. They were not clerics. They were not religious zealots. And the idea of the embassy takeover was to drive those people out of power. The other part, I think, was that they were the people who took us were worried that after that the leftists, the far left, the Iranian communists and associated groups, who were beating the anti-American drum. I mean, they had a lot of influence in like the radio and television at the time, and this stuff coming out of there was really vitriolic.
So there was a pro-Soviet party also, right?
It was the Soviet-backed.
Yeah.
Soviet-backed party. I mean, basically, they did what the Soviets wanted. And so they were beating this anti-American drum, and there were battles in this. For example, at the universities were battlegrounds between leftists and Islamist ministries, the same way. And I think the people who took us and their allies were afraid that if we don't act, if we don't do something, to show how anti-American we are, that these leftists will do it. So they wanted to preempt. They wanted to preempt the leftists. So as the man said, it wasn't about us. It wasn't about us. Now I must say, Ksenia, I'll admit, when I heard that, it didn't make me feel any better.
Obviously, yeah.
Something, it was kind of like a line out of The Godfather. It's not personal. It's business.
Yeah, I can imagine. We started already touching on the issue of the past, how the past experiences of Iran shape the today. So I would like to, take you to 1950s, the Mosaddeq toppling, and of course, the colonialism, the regulating of the Iranian oil, and so on. How did these past traumas of colonial past and then intervention, in the form of toppling Mosaddeq as a prime minister, and then, the 79 and everything that happened and so on, still determine what is happening in Iran today? What kind of ghosts, shape the today of the Iranian people?
Do you believe in ghosts?
Yes, I do.
Too. I do too,
Yeah.
especially if you deal with this part of the politics
Yes.
of this part of the world.
Yeah.
You have to believe in ghosts, and if you don't, if you don't pay attention to a ghost, they'll still come and haunt you. They'll do something. No, the ghosts. There were a lot of ghosts around, and you ignore them. If you ignore them, bad things happen. I mean, look at it this way. I'm trained as a historian. That was my specialty. And, historians are like, if you ask a historian something, they'll say, well, let's go back to the beginning. And the trouble is, in Iran, the beginning is like 2,500 years ago. You have to go back to Cyrus the Great and the Book of Daniel and all of those things. But in this case, go back just say to the beginning of the 20th century. What you had were enough Iranians. I mean, the literacy rate was, as I said, 5%, but maybe that was 500,000 people. And they realized something's wrong here. Something's wrong. And what's wrong is that we're not masters in our own house. We have these corrupt rulers who will sell their grandmothers for quick cash. And they did. And foreigners essentially controlled everything in the country. It wasn't a formal colony, but it was a colony in all but name. And so, and then we have these corrupt rulers. There's no check on them. They do whatever they want. They sell mineral rights to the foreigner. They take the cash and then travel to Europe, or buy jewels for their harem, for their wives. Something's wrong here. So since about 1900, maybe earlier, the Iranians have been struggling to somehow get control of their own house, to have some dignity. And in the case of Mossadegh, he realized, if we don't control our oil, we control nothing. How can we control our own country if we don't control our oil? Now, the British, the British, it was interesting. The British government, they didn't care that much, but it was the British oil company that said, "Oh, we can't have this. These Orientals, we can have Orientals telling us what to do. Impossible. That's our oil. We found it. We explored it. We brought it out. We refined it. No, can't happen. And they somehow convinced the Americans that Mossadegh, if he was not a communist, was weak, and it would let the communists in. And that was anathema to any American government. I mean, the thing about the coup, though, was two things: how many Iranians cooperated, particularly the clergy. I mean, the clergy, most of it hated Mossadegh.
Mm-hmm.
And the first group that Khomeini and his followers crushed after the revolution were the heirs of Mossadegh.
They were also quite secular.
They were secular. He was a nationalist.
Mm-hmm.
He was a nationalist, which Khomeini didn't like, because Khomeini thought nationalism, he hated nationalism. He said, the nation is Islam. So they were national. They hated it. When I got to Tehran in August of '79, they had renamed Pahlavi Avenue Mossadegh Avenue, but that didn't last long. That got changed very quickly. So that's all part of it. But most of that's become part of the myth and part of the grievance. It's a genuine grievance. I mean, it shouldn't have been done. It was a huge mistake, but it was done with the cooperation of a lot of Iranians. And many of my Iranian friends are self-critical because they say, we don't admit this. We blame it all on the foreigners. But
Right.
we very much had a hand in what happened, because why was it so easy to stage this coup? It was easy because we cooperated. Now, if you ask you can be started on these things. I'll go on, but just one other point. Everything about Iran, and particularly Iran and the U.S., is fraught. It's a matter of argument. People don't agree on it. So you ask somebody, when did the problems between the countries start? When did they start? And many Iranians would tell you, well, it started in '53 with the coup. Americans will say it started in '79 with the takeover of the embassy. I have a personal story. For me, the problem started in 1965. I was a high school teacher, very young, very inexperienced, in a town in Western Iran. And they said, here's your class. They gave me a class, put me in front of a class of 60 eighth grade boys. This is English. Well, they just ate my lunch. I could not control that class. I still have nightmares about it. And I always say, for me, that's when the problems with Iran started. Just as a footnote, one of the students in that class now lives in New Jersey, about 20 miles from where we live. And
So
we're
you
in
taught
touch.
him well.
Pardon? No, he says he pretends that never happened. He's really
That's
polite about
hilarious. Ambassador, so I would like to take you now, from the history of Iran, the beginning of the 20th century, and then the 50s, and then '79, the climax of today, of 2026, with this war. You mentioned already that this concept that still exists in the West, and also, of course, in Israel, that you are taking down some of the leaders and the regime might fall. This is not sustainable. This will not happen. But in your understanding, what is happening right now in Iran, there is still hope, certainly in Israel, but also in the U.S., that the Iranians who just protested against this regime a few months ago and risked their lives, they will do it again, because maybe they will feel now that the regime is weakened. But given everything that you know, as a diplomat, as an historian, as a person who is deeply involved in Iranian history and life, what do you think about these ideas? And is this really a daydreaming, or is it something real? This material is something real?
That's really a hard question. That's really a hard question. It's a good question, but
I
it's really
specialize
a
in
hard
asking
one.
the hard questions. I'm sorry, Ambassador.
That's good. No, I like these hard. I like this because you can debate them forever.
Right?
You know, really can. No, I mean, look, in the interest of full disclosure, you know, personally, I don't like the Islamic Republic. It's not the kind of regime, government that I would want to live on, that I would want to live under. And more to the point, whether I like it or not really doesn't matter that much. It tore apart my family, my wife's family.
Yeah.
Their lives were torn apart, and it did that to millions of Iranians. You know, these were people they never wanted to leave. I mean, you have many Iranians in Israel as well. As well, their position in Iran was good. They had good lives there, and they were very, very attached to their homeland. They loved it. My wife's family was the same way. They were very attached to their homeland, but they tore apart. So, as far as they're concerned, you know, these people, whatever gets rid of these people is a good thing. Now, I don't think personally that you can bomb and assassinate your way to a democracy. I don't see that happening. I don't see much precedent for that kind of thing. And the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, that this system, as appalling, as brutal as it is, I mean, it murders and it lies and it steals and it bullies to stay in power, and it will do anything to stay in power. But like it or not, it's been resilient. I mean, 47 years it's been in power. It's survived wars. It's survived sanctions. It survived international isolation. It survived incredible mismanagement. I mean, it has a worthless currency now. It survived the dislike of now 85% of its own population, and it's still there. I mean, people have been predicting its fall since day one. Yeah. And it's still there because they constructed a system that worked. It was not dependent on one person. They had a network of people. They didn't like each other necessarily, but they had roughly the same ideas. They all went in line, and they knew how to work together. They knew how to form coalitions. They knew how to make compromises among themselves. And they knew that their own survival took precedence over everything else. So if they had to make changes, they made changes. They made changes. But they're still there. So bringing them down, assassinate, when Khomeini died, for example, in 1989, nothing changed. Not much changed. A few maybe a little tone changed here and there on the edges. Killing Khomeini, killing 10 top politicians, 20 generals, 30 generals, isn't going to do it. I mean, maybe Israel and the United States can send so many bombs and missiles and drones into Iran. Maybe you can reduce Iran to a pile of rubble. As far as the leadership they're concerned, they don't care as long as they rule.
Just like Hamas or Hezbollah.
Sure. We can rule a pile of rubble.
So what can bring them down, Ambassador? What are your ideas about that?
That's a great question. It basically, the opposition, it's got to be Iranian. It's not going to be foreigners. I mean, yeah, we can, give moral support. We can give logistic support. I mean, for example, our government, for some idiotic reason, cut broadcasts to Iran in a place where information is key. I mean, the huge part of the battle is getting the truth to people. And in this and that, they cut that off. Our government cut that off. If you're an Iranian, you have only the state media. It's full of lies, and you know it.
But
But where are you going to get the truth?
But it's the Iranian regime that cut the internet now during the
Cut the
protest.
internet, but then again, you fight that. You go around it. You get news to people. That's what you do. You help people. You help people. You don't deport
like the Russian service of the BBC that my grandmother used to listen to while we were living in Moscow.
Yeah.
And she used the AM radio, and we were getting the signal.
Sure, because what the state media produced were all lies. And they knew, and people knew that. I'm sure they knew. I'm sure you knew. I'm sure your family knew that when they were in Moscow. And in Iran, people know that. But again, perhaps the biggest thing is, what's the maxim? Do no harm. Do no harm. Don't do something to undermine the people. But it has to come from Iranians. And the problem has been, at least from in the diaspora, in the Iranians in this country, they have been divided against themselves. They've been fighting. They fight among themselves more than they fight against the regime. Now, inside Iran, from what I understand, I haven't been there in now 45 years. Love to go back, but I can't. Apparently, it's a very different society, and much more. The literacy rate now is above 95%. Probably high. When I was there, it was 50%, and probably half of that for women. Now its overall rate is 95%, and more than that probably for women now. It's a very different society. It's savvy. The people are savvy. They're well educated. They're well educated. They're creative. You listen to what people say. You see what films they're making, the writings that they're doing. Their writings they're doing. I think it's a much more savvy society. Unfortunately, what you hear in the diaspora is these kind of, if someone isn't, fails my, how would you call it, my virginity test. They give each other these virginity tests, and if you don't agree with me 100%, then you're an agent of the Islamic Republic. If you don't support the war, you're an agent of the Islamic Republic. So this is unfortunately what's been happening. So even if the regime were fall tomorrow, I don't know what the people in the diaspora, can they think democratically? Can they think in a way? Because what does democracy require? It requires the ability to see someone who doesn't agree with you, not as an enemy, but just as someone who doesn't agree with you. So you and I may not agree with each other, but we talk. And you have your views, I have my views. I have my views. Most of my Israeli friends think I'm crazy the way I talk, or naive, or delusional. But we speak to each other at the same thing. We're not enemies. But that kind of thinking among diaspora Iranians, I think, at least
I wonder,
is very destructive.
You mentioned that your wife is Iranian, and I wonder what she thinks about what is going on right now, with the war, the goals of the war, and the future of the country that is her homeland.
We don't agree. I should say we've been married 60 years, and one of the secrets, I guess, is that we just don't agree on everything, and we know that. She says the only way to get rid of this regime is to drop bombs on them. They understand no other language. Now, given what happened to her and her family, I can understand that. I don't agree with it, but I understand. I understand it, and I don't. I don't blame them really for thinking that way. The problem is that dropping the bombs and sending in the drones and the missiles doesn't bring down the regime. It doesn't bring down the regime, and it kills the wrong people. It kills innocent people. But she, this is, and I mean, they have good reason for thinking the way they do. So I'm not quick to blame them. I'm no one. And who am I? I mean, I'm an outsider. I wish everybody well. I want to see good things for my friends, but beyond that, I can't go.
Before we wrap it up, I would like to ask you shortly about your prognosis. What do you think will happen? What do you think will happen in Iran? What is your prognosis for, I don't know, for the foreseeable future, how this war can develop further on?
You've asked me another impossible question that's impossible to answer. I should say, Ksenia, that I have long given up making predictions, particularly predictions about Iran, because my record doing so is very bad. It's very consistent. I've been wrong most of the time. I did not, for example, predict the revolution. Looked at Iran in 1977, 78, and you looked at it and you said, well, yeah, there are problems, but there have been problems before, and they have money, they're building things, people are getting educated, they have oil, they're getting lots of money for their oil. They don't have any foreign enemies. I mean, they had good relations with the Arab countries, good relations with Israel, good relations with the US, with the Soviet Union, China, North Korea, South Korea. So I wouldn't have predicted it. The other thing I wouldn't have predicted was that the revolution was going to go in the way that it did, that it was going to establish a brutal theocratic dictatorship, that Iran would become basically ruled by religious fascists. And that I would not have predicted. Probably naive on my point, but I didn't predict it. Nor did I predict that Iran and the US and Iran and Israel would remain enemies for so long. My thought was, well, everybody's going to see that this doesn't serve their interests, and that there might be a different way of doing it. Not that we're going to be friends.
That's more of a question about American politics than about Iran, actually, because this is a question of whether President Trump will choose to escalate and just go all in, even if the oil will go to $200 a barrel, or he will wrap it up and say, well, I won, let's go home.
That's what he's going to do. Who knows what he does? Because but the important thing, it seemed, a couple of days ago, I mean, every day it's something new. You get dizzy trying to follow these things. It's a road to madness if you try to sort of follow every little bend in the road, but twist and turn in events. But if he issued some 15-point plan, sent it to the Iranians. Now I haven't seen a text of it, but I've seen enough reporting about it to know. I mean, it involves things like the Straits of Hormuz. It involves missile programs. It involves the nuclear programs. Other things. It involves proxy forces. One thing it does not mention is a better government inside Iran. I mean, if Iran tomorrow was to accept all of these things, which probably won't do, but if it were to accept all of them, the Islamic Republic would remain in place and continue doing to the Iranian people what it's doing today.
That's disturbing.
It would bring no relief. He doesn't care. Now, I could ask you the same thing about the Israeli prime minister. I don't think he cares about the fate of the Iranian people. I mean, they talk about rise up or take back your government. It's not very helpful.
Of course, it's very transactional, and it's the same with the Kurds. The Kurds, we talk about the Kurds. The government talks about the Kurds when we want to get back at their Turks, for example, but not as a value of itself.
I lived. Well, I did my Peace Corps service in Iranian Kurdistan, the Kurdish region of Iran. And I had good friends there, and they ask me. They say, why should we let the Americans betray us again? They betrayed us so many. We've been betrayed so many times by foreigners. Why should we be betrayed again? The other part, and what's remarkable about this, and I know your prime minister is famous for not considering the consequences of his actions. His way seems to be bomb first, bomb second, and think of the consequences never. And one of the if Iran is weakened as a central state, and you have enclaves, you have Kurdish enclaves or a Baluch enclave somewhere. These are made to order for ISIS to set up in these because these are Sunni, mostly Sunni population, and these will become havens for ISIS. Now, is that better? Do we want that? But I would be very surprised if anyone in our administration or if anyone in the Israeli administration is thinking that way.
I think that you are right, Ambassador. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. I would like to thank you from bottom of my heart for this fascinating discussion. I hope that we can continue it at some point, perhaps when there is more clarity about where does Iran and the whole of the Middle East is going. Thank you very much.
As I said at the beginning, with so many close friends in the region, it's really sort of day by day very hard to watch.
Oh, there is
all of this.
Yes, some rockets were launched, so we'll have to wrap it because unfortunately we might have sirens sometime soon. So again, thank you very much, Ambassador, and hopefully we will resume this conversation about Iran and about what's important, about things that you need to remember if you want to, for goals not to interrupt with your present and your future. Thank you very much for that.
It's a pleasure, always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. You've been listening to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. A profound thanks to our guest, Ambassador John Limbert, for sharing such a rare perspective on the intersection of diplomacy, history, and the current regional crossroads. In a region often defined by headlines and noise, we in ROPES strive to bring you the nuance that actually matters. If you found today's discussion insightful, please subscribe to the ROPECAST on your favorite platform. To stay engaged with our latest analysis and updates between episodes, follow us on LinkedIn, X, and YouTube. I'm Ksenia Svetlova. Thank you for joining us. Shalom and salam.